This is Open Work, a look inside the watch industry, a podcast from Collective Horology. I'm Asher Apkin, co-founder of Collective.
And I'm Gabe Riley, co-founder of Collective. Collective
Horology is an independent watch retailer based in Southern California. We carry a wide range of independent brands, including Czapek, Speak Marine, Garrick, and more. To learn more about us and check out our available inventory, visit collectivehorology.com. Today on the podcast, we're talking about the trade-offs involved in managing a fast-growing watch brand. In particular, we're going to discuss how independent watch brand Czapek is navigating a period of intense growth and demand. We're going to look at what's going on behind the scenes to expand their operations, manage customer relationships, and plan sustainably for the long term.
And to do that, I'm happy to say we have a special guest. In fact, we have absolutely the perfect guest, and that's Xavier de Roquemaurel, CEO of Czapek. Now, we first met Xavier 4 years ago when we approached him about doing a collaboration with Collective. And over the years, as we've gotten to know him, experienced his passion for watchmaking and creativity, we decided to invest in the brand. So in full transparency, we are a Czapek retailer. Important to get that out of the way. Now, Xavier has worked in the luxury industry for quite a while, and he did that, of course, before refounding Czapek. So he has a broad perspective on this stuff. Xavier, thank you for joining, and welcome to Open Work.
Thank you, Gabe. Thank you, Asher. Hello, Collective lovers. Just the name itself, Collective, says everything, And that's like a name I would have wished to have come up with, because it's really so much, It's collective, so it's many, and it's a great name. So congrats, guys, on the way you approached coming out of the blue, and I know what it means coming out of the blue. Approach the industry, the watch loving, the watch collecting, the watchmaking, our passion.
Well, thank you for that. And Gabe gets full credit for the name of our business. We should do a future episode on all the incredibly dumb ideas I had for our business and its structure, but we'll leave that aside. To that end, I want to dive in with perhaps a little bit of a personal question, but one that I think is going to resonate with people who have ever thought about starting their own business. I want to talk about your funding. It was a really unique approach, certainly unique amongst watch brands that have grown as quickly as you have. And I'd love to talk about how you found it and the implications associated with it. Look, finding startup capital is hard no matter what business or industry that you're in. And I'd love to just understand a little bit more about the model you selected, why you chose it, and maybe a little bit of a loaded question, but if you were to start again today, if you would take the same approach.
Definitely. And let's come back to the past. So people love to speak about strategy, but most of the people have no idea of what is strategy. And if I look back, and I did quite a few times, I realized that we took the most important decisions in a very early stage without ever thinking that they were so important. And probably, thank God, we didn't know how important they were, because we would have been stressed by the implications of these decisions and by the consequences, by everything that was linked to this decision. We just took them because it was corresponding to our gut feelings, but more than gut feelings, also to what we believed in, to our values, to the vision that we had. We were three, So Harry was the initial re-register of the brand, the one who had found the name, found that it was not registered, and that it could be made a company and a brand out that was existing in the past, that was still existing because some Czapek watches were sold as vintage watches. That was very important from a branding perspective. But that was really a dormant name. And he found me. I was the lost guy, the lost CEO, as he said one day, because I never got the job before Czapek. And in the end, I brought in Sébastien, because I met Sébastien in a Salon des Belles Montres in Paris. And he was an interesting watchmaker, was suffering from not expressing his heart, his feeling, etc. And that's something that can happen with watchmakers. Even they're very introverts in general, but they do have a lot of emotions inside. And so I thought we cannot do anything, just two people who are not watchmakers with the level that we want to reach with Czapek. So we need a third man. and he has to be a very good watchmaker. And that was the case of Sebastian. And so we met. I met Harry once. Harry didn't reveal everything, just sort of a nice story, but I felt like this guy is not telling me the truth. There is something more, and he doesn't want to reveal it. So we decided to meet again 2 weeks later, and I brought in Sebastian, and I said to him, be prepared for anything, because I feel there is more than just a few watches to sell. And then he showed us some prototypes. Sebastian said, well, the manufacturing of them is not so nice, so I doubt we can sell them for more than a few thousand Swiss francs. And then Harry said, well, that's not the plan. The plan is actually to sell the company, well, by not selling it, but by founding it and relaunching it. So not selling watches, but selling shares. Okay. And that was not completely new as a concept, because in the past, especially in England, this has been done very often. And then we started thinking, how do we want to do it? And the fact is that Sebastian was young, 35, and we were older, Harry and I, we were 45 and 44. And then we thought, we know how billionaires are. We met already some, and that's something you don't know when you're 30, 35. You just think that there will be a fairy on the cradle and everything will happen and it will be nice and fantastic and some guy will fall in love and let us work. No. Now, the thing is that if you depend on one man that is very rich, the odds that things will go wrong are very high. And statistics are actually behind me. So if you doubt about my words, just check statistics on the rich guy. Not because they are not capable. They have been capable, so they brought all that value in. But the danger is that there is a discrepancy between the size of the initial investment and their money. And the distance is too high. So it becomes naturally a toy. It becomes naturally something that will not grow to a point that it will be relevant in their portfolio investment. And therefore, they will be tempted to treat it as a toy. And by treating it as a toy, they will kill it.
I think you're touching on a really important point, which Gabe and I empathize with. We've had this conversation before because, we're self-funded. We don't have investors. And one of the things that we've always struggled with there is that often many of the people who have considered investing in us or approached us to become an investor, it's because they're deeply passionate about watchmaking. It's something that they love individually. The challenge that we've seen there sometimes is that if your life is somebody else's hobby, then the way that you run your business may not always necessarily be structured in a way that's determined around growth and determined around sustainable success, but rather around somebody else's enjoyment of being an investor in that business. And that's something that has, frankly, I think, kept us away from accepting some investment. It sounds like that's something that you were also struggling with or thinking through as you considered the model.
So we decided to rule out billionaires. And we thought, Czapek is so beautiful. Czapek is a treasure. It's a dormant brand that is an absolute beautiful story. And we are the three lucky guys who can run it and revive it. Now, let's imagine 1 minute. How many of the watch lovers worldwide could love to be in our seats? Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, probably millions. Okay? Now, let's imagine some of them, we know how they are. They are entrepreneurs and they love to decide what they had to do to decide, and they made money out of that. But they decided also to make nice collections of watches because that was representing the way they were addressing life and work. And that was a way for them to say, to recognize what they had done and to recognize the passion they had for this kind of work that requires a lot of attention and a lot of dedication, because entrepreneurs are 200% dedicated. And that's very interesting. The relationship between entrepreneurs and watchmaking is very strong. And we thought, okay, let's look for this kind of guys. We were not so sure at the beginning. So we also tested private equity, VCs, family offices, 0 results. The only guys that could fall in love with were authentic watch lovers, watch collectors, who had either an appetite for risky investment or simply were entrepreneurs, and they just recognize exactly the struggles, the passion that they had. And some were telling us, I'm doing a boring product and I want to invest in your company because it's exactly the same, but with my favorite product, which is watches. I collect watches. I love watches. And that was the way to do it. So we started 3, then we regrouped family, friends, and a few fools. Fools are the most important. They are the business angels. Okay. And then the fools bring more friends. And these friends made the first wave of a public crowdfunding equity over 3 jurisdictions, which is a world premiere. Huh? It was a world premiere in 2016 to raise and 15 to raise funds this way had never been done before. And because usually you do one country and one jurisdiction, that's complicated enough. When you do 3 at the same time, it's like you're whipping yourself. Masochism. And we did it and it worked. And we raised 1.1 million and we were having the objective of 1 million. So we were above the objective. It was a success. And that was a big launch for Czapek. So you see, the process was in thinking, we don't want to depend on one person, but we want to have many more people around us that may become advisors, customers, friends, supporters, ambassadors, all these things together. And that was the benefit of doing it.
So one thing that you mentioned on that journey you went through was, you spoke to private equity investors, you spoke to venture capitalists, you spoke to family offices. And, watchmaking and watch retail are both very capital intensive businesses. I think that was one of the examples or one of the lessons Asher and I have learned is you need a lot of capital to do this. And in our own journey in exploring how we would fund the business until we kind of ended up where we are, where we decided we were going to fund it ourselves, we interrogated a lot of this stuff. And oftentimes we would get advice from people. And they would say, "Oh, just go get a small business loan," or "Oh, go talk to a venture capitalist." And we learned, similar to what you did, that a lot of those avenues are either not possible, not interested, or come with trade-offs, come with drawbacks. And I'm sort of interested because, people listening may be wondering, well, why is it so hard for a watch brand to get funding? Why would a private equity investor say no? Why would a venture capitalist say no to a startup company that has a lot of growth potential? And they look at the success that you've had. It's kind of like, well, why wouldn't a venture capitalist want to invest in a high growth company? So I'm kind of curious, when you explored those more traditional avenues of investment, why did they turn you down? Why did they say no to the idea of Czapek?
At this stage, it was driven by the fact that decision-making was as a group and the market is irrelevant. The product is irrelevant. The only thing that is relevant is the people. And as accountant, just admit that you are not the best person to evaluate the people. Let the rest of the team evaluate it. So you basically do not need, in decision-making or investing in a business, you don't need an accountant. And if you are a VC listening to that podcast, you can tell him, please remain doing just the accounting. We'll make better decision making without you. And it's okay. It's fine. We found some great people. We were much better. Because the thing is that today, the implication that you were asking for, Asher, at the beginning, is that we are run as a public company. The level, I am extremely demanding, extremely, with myself first, and with the team, and with everyone involved in 2 days. And we ask ourselves more than a normal public company does. And I've gone through late studies when I was in my 29, 30s, TSA in Barcelona, which is a top level MBA. And we were reading, the annual reports, which is a bunch of lies truth presented in a way that it just looks just fantastic, but it's not that, And if you read between the line, you just realize, hey, these guys are really in trouble there, because that should be a major point and just erase it, How can they not speak about it? And then 1 year later, you learn it's been closed and it was the disaster, And they always try to hide the disaster between minimal gains. And that's the way people run public companies. And that's why analysts are expert into analyzing them. Now no one has more than 15% of the company. Okay? Actually, it's less than 15%. And that means that we cannot be a family company, even though we do have a culture close to a family company. We are 222 shareholders, and every shareholder is treated the same. And that's a regulation in Switzerland, but that's also a company value to treat everyone the same, as a customer, as a person, as an employee, as a shareholder. And that makes that suddenly you have 200 people who are here to help, and they say, hey, how can I help? What can I do? And this is just fantastic, because not only you do not have someone telling you what to do, and someone who probably has no clue because he's outside the business and is not struggling, but on top of that, you have 221 persons ready to help you. And that's the other element. But to do so, you need that transparency. You need to actually have gone through the big corporations, learn what they were doing wrong to decide to do it right. And they can tell very quickly the difference.
It's funny that you mentioned the accountants sort of rejected the idea of investing in a watch business. Asher and I had the opposite experience. So this is a kind of a funny story. Asher and I used to work in the tech industry. And so we know a fair number of people who have gone on to work in venture capital. And when we were exploring, how we wanted to fund the business, I approached a friend of mine who's a venture capitalist, and I walked her through the business and the investment we were considering looking for. And she was like, "Oh yeah, no venture capitalist is going to invest in your business." And I was like, "Well, how come? We at that point, we had doubled our revenue or more than doubled our revenue every year. We were a profitable business." And her response was, "Yeah, well, that's the point. Your business isn't risky enough. It's too conventional. You're profitable. A venture capitalist is not going to be interested in investing in a profitable business. They're looking for something with much higher risk and therefore the potential for much higher reward," which was not the answer I was expecting and was kind of shocking. So I guess the other question I had for you about this is, you mentioned the thought process that led you to the investment model you have, and all of the benefits of the investment model you have. What are some of the trade-offs? What are some of the things maybe you've learned about the structure of the business? Now, look, you've said if you had to do it all over again, you would do it all over again. You wouldn't change anything. But I think it might be helpful for people to know, what are some of the things that maybe aren't so great about this funding model, because other people might be exploring it themselves.
The trade-off is that you have to accept and to actually to walk naked every day, to not hide everything, to show everything. So, to be capable to say, yeah, then on that we screwed up, but look, we corrected it immediately, and then we did this and that and this. It's very easy, and I will tell you my biggest screw up probably later in the interview. So, yeah, you have to be capable to be clear on that, because you know it when you are in high tech. How many lousy CEOs have you seen? And you are thinking, the day I'm a CEO, I'm not going to do that, And remember these things. And they were built on the only thing that is common to every human being, which is fear. Fear makes us do stupid things. And fear is, we all have fears, we cannot escape from that. And so the point is there, it's about trying to be a better person running the company. And by trying to be a better person, accepting that the only rule is to total integrity, total transparency, because this brings many more advantages in the end. And if you ask me, what is my dream? Actually, my dream is as much the company, the watchmaking, the watch loving, and the concept of companies. And my dream is to show that it's possible to make an incredibly profitable company, small company, without having to have a trade-off on integrity. On the contrary, showing that integrity can bring you to the next level of profitability.
Let's talk about a different kind of transparency, because I think what you were describing there was like the transparency you have to your shareholders, the investors in your business. You have to be accountable to them. There's nowhere to hide. There's a different kind of transparency that Czapek practices, which I think is equally interesting and quite different in the watch industry in terms of the way you behave and a lot of other brands in your category behave, which is you're very transparent with customers about how you make your watches. You're very transparent about who your suppliers are. You're very transparent about what Czapek has contributed to a watch versus what your suppliers, or you call them your partners, have contributed to a watch. And I'm kind of curious, like that is a very different way to operate a business and present a business, particularly for a watch brand that's a haute horologie brand, where so many of the brands in your category trade on everything is in-house, and there's a mystique around how things are made and a mystery around how things are made. And Czapek is quite transparent. And that's, I think, one of the things that I know caught my attention about Czapek, and I know caught Asher's attention about Czapek years ago. We just found it very, frankly, arresting and very refreshing. Why did you decide to do that? How did that practice and way of operating your business in terms of being so transparent with your customers, how did that come to be?
Oh, but that was coming from the first decisions of the company. There was 3 decisions, and one of them was the fact of being crowdfunded equity. And when you have crowdfunding equity, you open your book and you show everything you have. And we started with the equivalent of $10,000. It was 10,000 Swiss francs. That's what we had in the pocket. And so the deal to make was to make the development of a new model in terms of movement and caliber as a proprietary caliber, and the design of the watch and actually of the next watch. So 2 designs, all this based on success fees. So saying to the guys, okay, we give you whatever we have, 10, 2,000, 3,000 Swiss francs, and we'll give you much more. But once we will be founded and once we will be running, but this much more will be actually a success fee on what we have done. So you invest some of your time and you get a big kickback. And that was the way to proceed in terms of initial financing, because we started just with nothing, just the 3 of us. And then we had the family and had just enough to finish the first caliber and the 2 designs. And then we raised funds, and then we could go out and find, just before raising fund officially, the first partners. And the first partners, they tested us. So we had Jean-François Maujon for the movement. We had made the success fee with him. We had Antoine Choumi from Neodesis who made the design. And then the third one was Claude-Éric Jean from Donze et Cadran. And he tested us. And one of us, choose on a table full of dials, of enamel dials. One of us choose one dial saying, this is interesting. And out of the 100 dials, that was the most interesting. And so he loved that. And he said, okay, these guys love the right product. They go for the right thing. They don't go for the easy way. They selected the most complex dial, the one on which I will suffer. But that's the one I want to make me, Claude-Éric, as the world expert of enamel, And when we said, okay, we are working with Claude-Éric, and then we knocked on the door of HMS Weber, and Laurent Weber looked at us and we said, well, we are so small, we're just surprised you receive us. I said, yeah, but come on, you work with Claude-Éric, you work with Jean-François. These are the right people we want to be in that team, And so that brought together a dream team. That was fantastic. And the very beginning was very much helped by this guy. Then the COVID came and the post-COVID craziness about watches, the craze. And that created a huge tension. And the second tier and third tier of partners, and even some of the first tier, they really screw up on that. That was really difficult. We still are running after supply chain issues, supply chain chaos in beginning of 2024. So 2 years after the end, we're still running after that. So that's really the difficulty. And the drawback is that at one point you realize you have to integrate or you have to double source, triple source to make sure that you're not too much in the hand of one person that suddenly has a different interest than just preserving your interest. So there has to be a balance. Like in life, we can speak about your life partner. And if I speak about my life partner, if I don't look for a balance with her, I'm going to be in trouble. So the same thing, I cannot go to another lady, that's for sure. But I need to find a balance. So I don't double source for personality topics, but I do look for the balance.
I'm going to skirt the relationship topic here, but I do have sort of a two-pronged question related to what you're talking about. Because of the transparency that you've shared in the suppliers that you've worked with, and what you just said right now about some of the fundamental challenges that you faced over the last few years, I have two questions. The first is around pricing and how you think about pricing reflecting the challenges that you may have faced. So as suppliers were squeezed and it was harder for them to deliver on time, that obviously puts financial pressure on you, the manufacturer, or the company, as it were. And I'm curious how price is impacted, or if it's impacted by that. And then the second question I want to explore is more specific to a certain model, which is the Antarctique. The Antarctique's success, you've said on other podcasts and other interviews, was a surprise. Its incredible growth was not necessarily what was anticipated. So I'm really curious. You had sort of two challenges here. One was a lack of suppliers being able to deliver, and that potentially having an impact on price. And then you had the market wanting more than you were capable of producing due to external pressures and maybe even plan. So I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about that tension and how you managed it and what lessons you take away from that.
Okay, so let's start a little bit with the question about pricing, because I got caught in your last, and I was dying to say the perspective of a CEO in his company. At the very beginning, we thought, okay, you remember what we said about transparency? Transparency is now a must for everyone. If you are in the church, you have to be more transparent than anyone now today. And if you're in a business, you have to become transparent. And there is a lot of benefits in being transparent. And it's the same thing we'll see with pricing. The benefits is that naturally it invites people to collaborate. And the world today is collaborative. So collaboration and collaborativeness and transparency work together. And we couldn't have had so much help of our partner if we hadn't been naturally transparent about who we were, about the fact that, for example, me, I hadn't worked more than a year in watchmaking before starting Czapek. So I had to be clear on that. And I was bringing a fresh air, and they loved it because they loved the approach that I was bringing from Xenia and Loewe before. On the question of the pricing, it starts before, because what we wanted was to actually, we were looking at our older brother, okay? The people that people know who started in the year 2001, the Max, the Felix, and they were making watches that were absolutely dream watches that we could never afford because we'd never had that amount of money. And we knew so many people who were loving these watches and not capable of doing it. And we felt, okay, there is a disconnect between haute horlogerie and the people we meet, but the people we meet, they also love haute horlogerie. So we should not try to replicate what we love with the guys who paved our way, we should try to find our own area. And our area was to actually bring a tautology to a much wider audience. And we decided to make hand guilloché watches on precious metal dials at $16,000 in steel case. And that was a take that people were saying, this is not true, this is not hand guilloché, you cannot make it for that price. Well, the reality was that my idol is Leonidas. I believe in being Spartiate, okay? In profoundly saving every penny to invest in the product to make the best product. That was the driving decision behind that. So you can speak to people. What drives the system of pricing is a multiplier. And the multiplier is usually between 5 and 6. That's a crude reality of watchmaking.
I want to pause here for 1 second, just to point out, and frankly, just to tip my hat to you for again, exhibiting transparency there. I don't know many watch brands. The only other watch brand that I know that's somewhat public about their multiplier is Christopher Ward, and that's basically it. So you pointing out a multiplier of 5 to 6, I think, is in a public forum is actually a demonstration of significant transparency. So forgive my interruption, but I wanted to call attention to that.
Okay, so what we thought was, if we want to actually bring more people to watchmaking, we should be when we started, our first watch was even below 10,000 Swiss francs. It was 9,200 Swiss francs without tax and 9,900 with tax. And I remember a guy called Michael. He lives in Chicago, an old gentleman, fantastic. And he said, he came to pick up his watch, and he met another collector at our first office in Geneva. And they were talking together and then joking. And he said, "Yeah, I didn't even negotiate the price because I thought they are losing their shirt on selling a watch at that price." You know, that was very funny. I thought, we've been too low, you know. And it's very funny because I was teaching luxury marketing before, and I decided to not apply on purpose the principles that were the usual principles. And the reason why, because we wanted to take a different route. Because when you're a startup, you have nothing. You have no team, you have no money, you have no operations, you have no clients, you have zero. You're doomed to fail. That's your fate is to fail. And 9 startup out of 10 fail. That's the reality. So if you wanna beat in their terrain the big boys, you need to invent a different route. And we decided not to invent crazy watches that were, whatever, that extravagant. No, we thought, we love watchmaking. We are purists. Let's be crazy on the business model. Let's be different from anyone else. So we raised funds like we did. We went to Basel, and in Basel we had the objective of selling 75 watches, thanks to 15 orders of 5 watches. And we sold 1 watch to 1 retailer for himself. The police guy. Lushinsky, I love him. And his son now is a very good friend. So that was a reality, you know. It was a crisis, 2016. Not as strong as the one in 2008, but it was a moment of shaking. And that was it. And so we said, okay, we cannot sell to retailers. Let's sell direct. And then we became direct. But we always wanted to keep the retailers in our business model and to work with partners hand in hand. Because the idea was to create value by sharing value. This is really what is behind the reason to crowdfund, to create value by sharing value. So the more you cut the pie, the biggest it becomes.
You remind me, when we transitioned our business away from collaboration exclusively and started doing retail, Gabe, I'm sure you'll remember this, we received our first order of wholesale watches, and we put them online, and we had built our entire model of, we think we're gonna sell through these at X pace, and that'll drive Y revenue. We put them all online and nothing sold. Nobody bought anything. And it was, that moment of, much like you, we went, maybe the approach and the model here is not working and we need to rethink that. Which, by the way, I think is an area I find fascinating about what you're talking about, which is another element that is intrinsic to small business, which is being willing to acknowledge when something works and when it doesn't, and being able to and willing to pivot. And I'm curious, if you put your teaching hat back on, you hinted at something, and I'd like to just go into it briefly. You said you chose not to follow some of the basic principles of luxury marketing and luxury sales. What are the principles that you decided not to follow?
Well, normally you do. I mean, if you look at what Richard did, he started, instead of being at 90,000 euro first tourbillon, he jumped to 170 because his pricing, his costs of production was leading him to have a price of 120, 130. And the highest tourbillon was sold in Place Vendôme at the Breguet store for 90,000. So it was like completely out of market. Basically, he said, and sorry for the bad word, fuck it, let's sell at 170. And that started the craze about it. And he was right. But then again, he took the position that was the right position for him at that moment. And the thing is that when you think about positioning, you should not go exactly against someone that is much bigger than you and has demonstrated that it was extremely good. You should try to find your own area. So we decided, because we were crowdfunded, to launch an accessible product at 10,000 to 20,000. And then later on, we launched much higher model. Normally, the principle is exactly the opposite. When you looked at the first moccasin, very, very simple by Gucci, they launched the crocodile version first, and then they made a textile version later on in the year 2000. And that became things that they were selling like extreme gloves, really like incredible demand. So that was a system that was widely used in luxury. And we went against that because our strong belief is that luxury is evolving. Everything is evolving all the time. And luxury in the 21st century is not the same as luxury was at the end of the 20th century, beginning of this era. And now luxury is a balancing act. And this balancing act is in between finding the perfect product for yourself that you dream of, not being too ostentatious, having a part of status linked to it, but you want that status to be recognized by the one that you want them to recognize, You want to be selective on who will recognize it. And you want to be capable to explain it. So you ask for this transparency. And you ask for fair pricing. And the more complex is a product, like watchmaking, which requires a lot of brain, you're going to analyze the pricing. And this is what I wanted to tell in your last podcast, which is the guys, they know extremely well. You cannot beat them. And we started with a markup of 3.6 because below 3.6, we would have been dead. And we realized that with 3.6, we had so little margin that it was going to be very difficult to do a lot of R&D without having the possibility to fail on something. When you fail, we redo. And so what you've lost it. So far, we never failed, but we had not enough margin to fail. So this is the idea also with being a Spartiate. If you have too much money, you run into the fear of not investing it. A good entrepreneur should not be fed with too much money because he's going to have another decision that is even more complex, which is they gave me 100,000 and I needed 50,000. What can I do with the other 50,000 without looking stupid? And this is really the key behind being a Spartiate, trying to find what is the key single decision that will save your company. Do it perfectly and forget about anything that is not so important, not so much needed.
There's a really interesting paradox here between what you're talking about is a key luxury principle, right? So if we take the example that you gave of the tourbillon there, it's priced so much higher out of the market that it helps to create that sort of effect of intense desirability. And the reality that as a startup owner, if too much cash comes in, that could create some significant challenges. I think in our business, sometimes the best and most creative solutions we've come across are when we are cash strapped, not when we have significant cash to invest, which, is not fun for sleeping at night, but, does, I think, it helps build that entrepreneurial muscle, which is necessary as you do this, of being able to think through not only what risks am I willing to take and how am I going to fund them, but also how do I rationally think through the growth of my company? Because obviously if we all just started becoming net revenue positive on day one, we'd probably make a lot more mistakes than when we start, climbing our way out of the financial hole that every company starts in. So it's an interesting paradox of a price that, a product that needs to be priced in order arguably to create desirability, and then an entrepreneur that needs to be a little starved in order to be successful in creating that product. I find that paradox fascinating.
And then you have to be coherent. So if you decided that you would offer a guilloche at 16,000 in a steel case, you cannot just suddenly say tomorrow, yeah, I'm going to double that price. Doesn't make sense. So that was for the Kedeberg. When we had to do the Faubourg de Cracovie, we had an even slimmer markup because the movement was so expensive. And then we step by step, worked on how to manage to have a better markup, but without changing our soul. Because the customers were our friends. And most of the customers at the beginning were our shareholders. So they knew everything by essence, no? But further, listening to them, we understood that there was something missing in the market. That the guys were telling us, and I have a huge respect for that company that Bloomberg's announced today that they were making 10 billions last year. But they were telling us, we collect watches, we have that, I have that. But during the week, no. I wear the works from that brand with a crown because, I don't want to be... First of all, I'm goofy, so I want to have a sturdy watch that is a sort of a daily banger. And second, I don't want people to know what I really own, And anyway, I never find an easy to wear watch that is a tribute to haute horlogerie, thanks to the finish, thanks to the creation, thanks to the dial making. All this was missing. And we thought, okay, why don't we do a watch that would be a real sport watch, so resistant to sport, resistant to fall. I made a test in Los Angeles in a company, in Irvine, in a company about shock, They were doing medical devices. There was a superb shock machine to test the material. So I tested that beautiful watch with an enamel dial. Nothing happened. Everybody screamed, but nothing happened. So we really created it in a sportive manner, using German silver instead of brass, for example, for torsion resistance or things like that, but as a tribute to watchmaking, to haute horlogerie, really. And that's why it became so beloved. We decided to do it in-house because the external engineers of our partners were stubborn. So we never could get our message through to really make them do what we were saying about aesthetics. They were too technically driven. And we also saw that if we can make that watch in a volume that is 300 units per year, for example, then we can start making more money because we will consolidate more work in-house and not just assemble quickly parts that have been made and that's it, So it was a beautiful reasoning behind, and it did work. And people loved it because it was thought from a blank sheet of paper and respectful of every ethos that we had since the beginning about the fundamentals, the soul of haute horlogerie.
The story of the Antarctique, I think, is a fascinating one. And I think, It really marks a new chapter for Czapek. I mean, so much of what you talked about from the early days of the business, from the Kitaberg or the Falborg to Cracovie, the original watches, was about having a compelling product at a reasonable price, being an entrepreneur, and in many ways really struggling and working hard to find success. And those are beloved watches. I mean, the Kitaberg is a GPHG winner. It's not like the business wasn't successful, but with the Antarctique, Czapek entered a new stage of awareness, a new stage of success, a new stage of demand. And I have two questions about that. They're really interrelated. One is, I think a lot of people would think like, well, good for Czapek. That's a good problem to have. Wouldn't every brand, every business want to have a hit product? And I have to imagine that there are some downsides and some drawbacks of having a hit product. Struggling to keep up with demand, I would imagine, is a challenge. Another one is, this is a product that almost overnight rewrote the business of Czapek, fundamentally changed the business. And so how do you continue, as you were saying, to be consistent and maintain the soul of the brand, which for years was defined by a lot of hard work and struggle and toil? Now you have a runaway hit product. So I'd love to explore a little bit what the biggest all told, I would have to imagine Antarctique is a hit for the company and something you're grateful to have. But what are some of the challenges that come with having a hit product like that? What were the things you really struggled with and continue to struggle with when it comes to Antarctique?
The order book and the pressure to have accepted an order and seeing time flying and seeing that you don't get delivered of your partners. And because you don't get delivered, you look dumb and you can't say, yeah, last month I told you we were missing that components that we would get it this month. Well, guess what? We're not getting it. We're just the dumb guy, That's really very, very, very painful. And I would say the critical thing was the best decision, but it took me 5 days to convince the board, because we have a structured board. We love governance in Czapek, and good governance. And good governance means you share your power. So you don't have Xavier being ruling the world like the king's son, Louis XIV. It's not me. And whenever I'm starting to be too much like that, my kids are saying, "Stop, Louis XIV, please." And so I'm down to earth. But the board accepted finally that we closed the order book. And I think a small company can die from taking too much order easily. So it's a salvation to say, stop, I don't take your order anymore, because I can't, because that's a nonsense to pile for 10 years of my production of last year. Just imagine, we were making 150 watches in 2020. We had, at the end of 2020, about, I would say, 100 watches not delivered. So we could have made 250 if you want. At the end of the following year, we had 300 watches made, but we had 667 watches waiting to be delivered. So we were already in a range of 1,000, But it was like, wow, 300, from 150 to 300. It was like, what is this, And I'm going to your question now to answer it, because you need to start to sort of break down your company and rebuild it. And you need to do that every time you scale and you reach a new level. And you don't have the choice. And some people will leave the company in that moment. But if you prepare them well, they will not. They will understand that change, and they will actually make it happen as fast as you will. The next year, so that was 2022, and we reached an order book of I would say 2,000 watches, more than that, 2,500 watches. And we were making still 450 watches. So just imagine, we were 3,000, sorry, it was 10 years. We were 10 years of last year production, which was 300, So So it was like completely crazy. That's when we stop. That's when we say it's over. Watches and Wonder 2022. And I jumped over my personal situation in the middle. Then we reached last year. And so last year, I have actually pushed some of our retailers to cancel some of their orders by telling them, look, there's no way. Some of your orders are speculative. We can see that. Stop that, Let's work with real numbers. So you got real orders, and we want to satisfy these guys because they are real watch lovers. Let's have them as priority deliveries. And then you want some for your window. Let's make some watches for your window. You want some stock that will come third. And that's the way we work now. So we really try to figure out when there is a person waiting behind his watch to give him his watch as fast as possible, if possible in less than 12 months. And we're getting there. We're getting there now. So it's a big improvement. It's been a very painful progression. And in that progress, well, we will work more with probably less partners. Okay, you understand? So that's the limit of the horizontal manufacturer. You need to have people who are committed also strategically to what you do, to be ready to accept the way to work. And if they don't, you say, I love you, but let's stop working together. We're better off, working with people who completely understand what we are doing.
In listening to you speak, I'm constantly reminded of especially in independent watches, the real dance around inventory and availability. And what I mean by that, and I'm not talking about anything that's artificially constructed, but there has to be a balance between what a manufacturer can create, the consumer demand, and then some amount of flexibility in terms of availability, right? Like nobody wants a situation where, let's say in the United States, every Czapek retailer had one of the exact same model, because that creates dynamics in the market that are not great. On the other hand, nobody wants a situation where every Czapek retailer in the United States doesn't have anything to sell. That's not good either, because then to a certain degree, everything is a little speculative, right? Like you call us, you call Topper, you call Oster, you call Cellini, whatever, and nobody has anything. Then that kind of impacts consumer confidence.
And you get good pressure and a good list of insults for not delivering your retailing partners who are your best friends. So you have to deliver something.
You do. But like I said, I think it's an interesting balance, right? Because if you tied into this is also another topic, which we don't have to get into, but it's certainly related, which is residual value on pre-owned watches. When a company overproduces and over-delivers, that creates an overabundance of product, which just market dynamics lowers the value, but then the opposite has also been true in the past, where under-delivery creates unnecessary demand and prices surge past the hypothetical value of a product. And stuck there somewhere in the middle is the balance, which of course none of us can control.
That leads to my major screw up in 10 years, which is, so we decided to make the investment into producing our own components, starting with the case because we couldn't get cases, and capacity to do bracelets because people were saying you should improve the quality of the bracelets. And they were right. So we're working really trying to figure out the best way to do that, making big investment decision. 1.5 million last year, another 500,000 this year. So that's 2 million. When last year we did 16 million, but that's what the year before we didn't even do 8 million, so we've doubled every year in the past 3-4 months, 3-4 years, sorry, 3-4 years. So that leads me to the moment where you make that decision and you feel, you make an Excel file to convince yourself that you're making the right decision, so you put up cash flows, you put up production, and then turns out, you look at your order book and you got 3,000 watches on the order book and you feel like, okay, so what happens if I do 3,000 watches a year? First of all, I got no more people waiting and complaining because they're waiting and etc. And second, I can pay very quickly my investment. Okay, so that's my new number. Okay, fantastic. Let's go for 3,500 and let's make this huge bet for a company that was founded by, I told you 222 crazy guys to go for such a large investment. And so you're so happy and you're so stressed by the decision that the first guy, the first journalist who interviews you, makes you say everything. And you say, yeah, we're going for the 3,000, 4,000 units, etc. So the journalist taken into the energy that you as an entrepreneur have to have, rounds that up to 5,000. And meanwhile, you have made maybe hundreds, maybe 500 of interviews asking yourself whether ever anyone was reading them. It turns out that this interview, where someone says Czapek goes for 5,000, everybody reads it. And everybody in the whole industry is about it. And you're like, oh no, that's not, don't want to go there. But we're looking at that thinking we don't want to go there. We want to be below, but we want to have a good number. Okay, so you suddenly have launched the wrong message and people look at you like, oh, you want to be everywhere. And therefore, your value will be diminishing. And then you remember that you were always saying we want to remain into 1,000 watches made. And then you make 1,000 watches in 2023, and you realize that doing 1,000 watches, which is what we did last year, is a great number, is a fantastic number. And that you don't need to actually grow into a number like crazy. What you need is to manage intelligently your order book. It's another issue. So you need to launch new product. We're in a market that loves novelty, and that's normal. We are human beings. This is what we love, novelty, new things that we want to have emotion for. And so we reviewed the whole business model, going back to the basics, to what we wanted at the beginning. We want to give a chance to a lot of people to access to Total Horlogerie. But unless the whole world gets rich, which doesn't seem to be the case, then it should be normally a few thousand people around the world that will join every year. And so, if I'm not talking about people who are just speculators and flippers, I'm talking about normal people. So that's what we wanted. So we want to keep that number small. And the 1,000 is a beautiful number. So that's where we are going to stay, unless suddenly we saw that we were wrong again, and we need to revise that number again.
Well, Xavier, I think that's about as good a place as any to leave it. And we just want to say thank you so much for joining us. And as Asher pointed out, thank you for the transparency. You're right. There's a lot of, since you already cursed, I'll just say it here. There's a lot of bullshit in the luxury industry and in the watch industry in general. And, the goal we have with this podcast is to take people behind the scenes, help them see what really goes on and understand what's actually happening in the watch industry and why brands and other people in the industry make the decisions they do and do what they do. So thank you for your transparency and shining a light on that with us. We greatly appreciate it. Well, that was a great chat. And I think, the note we ended on there about transparency was one of the big takeaways for me. I always thought about Czapek's transparency in terms of like the benefit it had for the customer, the consumer. Like I encountered Czapek as a watch collector and I was like, wow, this is so great that they're so transparent, because it's really interesting to me to know like who their suppliers are, who they work with, and like it's just really refreshing. What I took away from Xavier, however, was like, that may be true, but that's not actually the real reason Czapek started by being transparent. It was actually like a necessity for survival. And I mean that in two ways. Like when they were recruiting, before they had done their funding, when they were recruiting suppliers to work with them, they basically said like, we're going to do profit sharing with you. Like we'll pay you a fee up front, and then we'll compensate you a share of the profits in the future. And therefore, it was important for them to be transparent about who was working. Like part of the benefit of those brands signing up was almost like the publicity Czapek would garner for them. And then the other thing is like they used the transparency and sharing who their suppliers were to recruit other suppliers. And I thought that was really interesting. It was like, oh, well, if Donze Cadran is working on your dials, then this other supplier for bracelets might be interested in working with you. So it had nothing to do initially with the benefit it offered to the customer. It was all about like a different way of recruiting suppliers and bringing on the best people by basically giving them a bit of the limelight, which I thought was really interesting. I never considered it that way.
Well, I think for better or for worse, it's also just a good example that while every industry is different in many ways, everything is largely the same. You know, I mean, if we had decided not to open a watch store and instead decided to create an advertising agency, if we, picked up a Halo client, for example, that would help us get other clients too. And I think it's a good reminder, just putting on the entrepreneurial cap for a minute, that there's a lot that can be learned from one industry to the other that is applicable. I mean, sure, if you're a sales consultant, the way that you organize your business will be different than if you're building a watch manufacturer, but there's certain principles that may apply. And one of those is if a company or a client that's high profile is willing to invest in you and believe in you, that speaks to your credibility, and your credibility is, of course, what's ultimately going to help other people come and, not just purchase your products as consumers, but be willing to partner with you as a business. So I think that there's consistency industry to industry in that way. And that's what struck me about it, that, the more different some things are, the more they actually can be the same.
Yeah, that brings up the other thing he mentioned, which for me, I was like, oh, there's something here like I and maybe both of us should really be considering applying to our business. And we didn't get into it much with him, but Xavier basically said, at every stage of growth for the business, and he was really talking about the change from moving from the pre-Antarctic era of Czapek to the Antarctic era of Czapek. And he said, essentially, every time you go through a change like that, you need to break down the company and reinvent it all over again. And it was an interesting thought. I was like, okay, with our own business, what are like we call them sacred cows, or what are some of the fundamental ways that we do business, or some assumptions we have about how things work that we might need to reassess ourselves. So that was like thought-provoking for me. I don't have an answer, but I was like, man, I really need to take that to heart. And that's something we should be considering ourselves.
It's actually an interesting conversation for a future pod for us. If I don't know if you'd be interested in this, but I mean, there are things that we had to tear down and rebuild with our business in the past. And I'm positive that that's going to happen again. But that reminds me of the other thing that really stuck from what Zav was saying, which is this idea that entrepreneurs should be starved for resources. And, naturally, I could imagine other entrepreneurs listening to that and just giving a heavy sigh thinking about it, because of course, starting your own business is, if nothing else, financially brutal. But he makes a good point, which the more I think about it, the more I agree with it. That if you have extremely limited resources, it forces you to be creative, and it forces you to make difficult decisions on a regular basis, because you just don't have the luxury of being wrong financially, to be sure, strategically also. So that idea of, really thinking about how to limit your resources in order to drive your own growth sounds like it's in two ideas in opposition, but it really isn't.
No, it's a fascinating paradox, and you're right. In terms of our own business, it's something that we've learned the hard way, and I think actually we've come to embrace. I mean, we talked about being self-funded, and that's how we run our business. And I think part of the reason we've become comfortable with funding the business ourselves and not seeking outside investment is we've realized like there are actually some benefits to running lean.
Absolutely. And one final thought before we say goodbye here. I'm also just struck, and I mean, look, we we said at the beginning of the pod, and I think it was important to disclose, like, we are Czapek retailers, and we've done a lot of business with Czapek over the years. But it is remarkable, frankly, when you look at how that company has scaled and how the company has grown, not just for, the total number of watches that they've shipped and produced, et cetera, but just how much of a part of the conversation they are now, and in how short a period of time they managed to accomplish that. So it is it is an inspiring thing to see, and a really awesome thing to see when you've spent the kind of time that we have with them, and you realize that not only are they passionate people, not only are they trustworthy people, but frankly, they're really nice people. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again: one of the greatest benefits of being self-employed is getting to choose your partners and who you work with, and that's a really wonderful thing.
Hear, hear, and that's also the perfect place to leave this. Well, thanks for listening to Open Work. It's a podcast from Collective Horology. You can find us online at collectivehorology.com, and you can find our guest, Xavier de Roquemaurel, at Czapek.com. Feel free to get in touch with any questions, comments, or suggestions by emailing us at podcast@collectivehorology.com.